Now, I'm not an economist. My work is about turning around the financial performance of businesses driven by brands, for which I conduct extensive research to understand the relationship between user experience of products and what is it about them that causes consumers to choose them and buy them over other competitive products. In short, I help my clients create a competitive advantage for their brands in their markets. Welcome to this 7th episode on globalization, global brands, and branding. The key message of this series is fairly simple, which is that if governments want to grow their economies faster, they must incentivize their businesses to build global brands. COVID has proved to be quite a stumbling block, not only in terms of the danger it poses to human lives, but the damage it has caused to economies across the world. But some brands seem to have bucked the trend. Take Apple, for example. When I began this series, Apple's market cap had crossed $1 trillion, the first time ever in the history of business. And India's GDP at that time was around $3 trillion. 9 months of COVID have passed, and Apple's market cap has increased to about $2.2 trillion, while India's GDP would most likely be around the $2.5 to $2.6 trillion mark. Now, I keep emphasizing global brands, and for a very simple reason. The markets across the world would be far larger than what any one nation could offer to a brand, and therefore the business that owns the brand. Take Apple, for example. For the past several years, more than 50% of Apple's revenues have accrued from outside the USA. So Apple's success is not due to patriotic, flag-waving Americans alone who may or may not be boycotting China. Another key point, 50% of Apple's revenues come from just one product line, the iPhone. Now, if we were to do a little extrapolation and assume that Apple's market cap too is driven to about 50% by just this one product, then at around $1.2 trillion, iPhone's market cap would be about half of India's GDP, which would be around $2.5 trillion today. What makes iPhone such a phenomenal success right across the world? In one word, it's the user experience of the iPhone. In fact, that of almost all Apple products since its first most successful one, which was Macintosh way back in 1984. And what this user experience does, it gives a huge amount of confidence, not just to the people who bought an iPhone, but as endorsers who tell other people who may or may not have bought an iPhone that it is a truly wonderful product. Which means you no longer have to rely on sales push or advertising. In fact, Apple's advertising expenditure ever since it launched its iPhone has been steadily decreasing while iPhone sales have been going up. iPhone's user experience is not just memorable or positive, it borders on the addictive. What does it take to create such an addictive user experience? And that brings me to the subject of this episode, knowledge, or the process that creates this knowledge, R&D. To illustrate how good R&D can help create outstanding market success. Some time back, my company was appointed by Yamaha Motorcycles India Limited to investigate the reasons why their sales were dropping. Now, as part of our process, we go and understand user experiences from markets across any given territory. So apart from interviewing actual users of motorcycles, not just Yamaha, but all motorcycles in the country, I also happened to interview the mechanics that these owners would frequent. And I asked some of these mechanics, what is it that makes the market leader, Hero Honda, what it is? Hero Honda had more than 50% of India's motorcycle market share at that time. And all they said was, Indian brands of motorcycle normally come in for an overhaul at around 30 to 35,000 kilometers, while a Hero Honda would rarely come in for an overhaul until it had reached a reading of around 90,000 to about 100,000 kilometers. What created this success? The founder, Soichiro Honda, started working in his pre-teen years with his father, who was a blacksmith. So forging and welding was the main thing that his father's shop did, and using these skills they used to repair bicycles. Soichiro was pretty fascinated by motorcycles and automobiles because these were quite a novelty in Japan those days. So he joined one of Japan's leading automobile service centers, and while working for them during the daytime, at night he would use their equipment to try and make better piston rings, because piston rings are critical not just for an engine to deliver the power that it's designed to, but to keep delivering that power over a long time. Now Soichiro Honda decided that he would try and interest Toyota Motor Corporation in buying his piston rings. In his first attempt, all his piston rings were rejected. Disappointed, but he didn't give up. Soichiro figured he needed to know all he could about metallurgy, and so joined a technical institute. As soon as he'd learnt what he had to, he quit the technical institute after just 2 years into his 4-year program. So he wasn't awarded a diploma. Now that's the urge to create that Steve Wozniak refers to here. Now obviously expertise in making piston rings and understanding metallurgy was critical to Honda's success in its early years, and which also explains why the mechanics said what they did about the longevity, durability of Honda engines. So I hope this illustrates how superior knowledge can lead to superior business results. In fact, although Apple tops the charts of Interbrand's 100 most powerful brands in the world, a little way down in the top 20 is Honda. So I've spent the past 2 months looking at R&D, specifically R&D investments across nations and across the biggest companies in the world. United States of America and China account for 25% each, which means half of the world's total spends on R&D are by these two nations. China's expenditure on R&D is more than the next 3 or 4 nations on this table put together. But a more important indicator rather than overall spends is something called R&D intensity, which means of the income a business or a nation makes, what percentage of it goes into R&D. So here the picture changes. While India ranked number 4 in terms of overall expenditure globally, in terms of R&D intensity, it ranks almost right at the bottom, as you'll see in this chart, pretty close to Bangladesh and Pakistan. And surprise, surprise, topping the charts are 2 small nations in terms of geography and population, namely South Korea and Israel. In fact, even little Qatar spends a higher percentage of its earnings on R&D than does China. Moving on to another measure of attitude towards R&D is how many researchers are there per million of population in a country. And researchers here is in the areas of what are called the hard sciences, technology, engineering, etc., not history or economics. And here we see a similar trend. India again grouped almost right at the bottom of the chart, along with Pakistan and Bangladesh. We mustn't overlook the fact that a lot of the R&D expenditure is made by governments on social and public infrastructure, whether it's dams, highways, hospitals, healthcare, especially healthcare these days because of COVID, and also on defense expenditure. So let's move to the businesses within every nation and understand how they spend on R&D. Amazon tops the charts here, as you'll see, and in fact has been doing so for almost the past 3 years. The other interesting fact is that software and internet as a category and computing and electronics dominate the top 10. To try and understand if there's a correlation between high spending R&D companies and the nations they come from, I took another sample, this time of the top 50 spenders of R&D across the world. Surprise or maybe no surprise, out of the 50 companies, almost half of them, 23, come from the United States of America. 2 are from China and none from India. Now moving on to R&D intensity. You'll notice a fairly familiar pattern here. I've taken 12 companies here to make up a certain point, which is that while the software and internet sector companies, Google, Amazon, even Intel in this case, tend to dominate this chart of 12, there are now 3 companies from the pharmaceutical sector, and each of them spends well into the high double digits. So on both these scores, how do Indian companies compare to the top spenders on R&D? So I have this time taken the top 50 companies and the average of the top 100 companies in terms of R&D expenditure, both in terms of overall expenditure and intensity. Now if we take the 50th highest spender, which is Renault from the automotive sector, and compare it to its equivalents in India, which is Tata and Mahindra, you will see that not only is the overall expenditure on R&D higher, even as a percentage of its revenues, Renault spends more than either Tata's or Mahindra. Moving on to the pharmaceutical sector, I've taken Sanofi and Amgen from the USA as amongst the lowest in the top 50. Here too, overall spends and intensity of spends are far higher than that of Indian companies, say for instance Sun Pharma. Another key point out here, while Reliance has the highest revenues, it has the lowest expenditure on R&D as a percentage of those revenues. And the comparison is definitely not very flattering for Indian businesses. Now, India has a history of creating knowledge that has pretty much created some of the industries that we spoke about. For instance, without the zero, credit for which goes to India, you would not have had the decimal system and therefore the whole business of computing. Right? Next, Ayurveda. Partly due to COVID, there's a resurgence of interest in this field of healthcare. Is there something else, therefore? Are we Indians content to bask in the glory of our past at the cost of our future? I decided to take a lateral look and look at some other figures. One question that somebody had asked me is, do Indians go abroad, especially the most talented Indians, because of money? Yes and no. No, because there's another far greater reward, which is recognition. Now, the Bharat Ratna is India's highest award to any civilian in its own country, of course. So I took a look at this table of Bharat Ratna winners since the award was instituted. And you'll notice that the category that predominates is social activists who are politicians and social activists who may not want to be termed as politicians. More to the point, just 3 scientists. It all starts with superior knowledge. Superior knowledge leads to products that are superior simply because they have a superior user experience. A series of such products from a brand gives it its pulling power, frees it of the need to push its products through salespeople or advertising. Several such products lead to revenues which make for a very powerful organization owning these brands. And the larger the number of organizations you have in a country, the stronger that country's economy. If you like this episode, please do hit the like and subscribe button, share it, and ring the notification bell in case you want to be informed about the next episode. Finally, don't forget to put your comments and suggestions in the section below.